Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys a book haul. These are all books that I think I have been accumulating since December, but maybe even going back to November. So I've talked about this quite a bit, but I have been putting myself on a low buy for 2020. So while there are a good amount of books in this haul, because like I said, I've been accumulating these books for a couple of months, there are not nearly as many books as there have been in past book hauls because of my low buy. I'm really trying to only buy physical copies of books for my bookshelf. If it's a book that is a part of a series that I really love, or if it's a book that I have already read and have given it 5 stars. I am trying to narrow down my bookshelf so that one day in the future, all of the books on my shelves will only be books that I have given like 4 or 5 stars, just books that I absolutely love and want to reread over and over again. Also, this book haul is quite a bit different from my past ones too, because I bought a lot of adult romances. I still do have like a couple of fantasy novels and, you know, YA novels and things like that, but my hauls in the past were mostly YA books, fantasy, sci-fi, and things like that. So this is also going to be a bit different in terms of genre. So without further ado, let's just get into this stack. So the first couple of books are 2 books in an adult romance series, and that is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey and Love Her or Lose Her. These are companion novels, so Fix Her Up is the first book and Love Her or Lose Her is the second book. I read Fix Her Up last September, I think, for the last round of Contemporary-thon, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. This one is essentially about Georgie and Travis, and they end up going into like a fake dating kind of relationship because they both want to be taken more seriously by their family, friends, and colleagues. And then we have Love Her or Lose Her, which is following 2 characters that were kind of featured in Fix Her Up, but you don't see a lot of them. And their names are Rosie and Dominic, and at the beginning of this novel, they are already married, but they are definitely having a lot of marital issues, and so this book is them kind of working through that. Just reading the synopsis definitely reminds me of the Bromance Book Club, which I really loved. I read that in January and gave that one 5 stars, but I'm really excited to read the second installment, and I'm also really excited to have the first installment in my personal library as well. Next few books I have to talk about are all books that I actually read within the last couple of weeks, and I loved them all so much that I needed to have my own physical copy. The first one is A Nordic King by Karina Halley. I talked about this one a lot in my end of January wrap-up, so I will link that up in the cards above. And I loved this book so much. This is essentially about Axel and Aurora. Axel is actually the king of Denmark. At the very beginning of this book, he realizes that his wife never loved him, and his wife ends up dying in a car accident because of him, so he's feeling a lot of guilt. He's feeling very bitter and jaded, so he's definitely a brooding hero. And then we have Aurora, who ends up being the nanny for his 2 daughters, Clara and Freya, and this is just their slow burn romance, and it's just so good. I highly recommend it. I listened to the audiobook of this one off of Hoopla, and I just cannot wait to read the other books in this series. Next, I have The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is another book that I talked about in my end of January wrap-up, so again, if you're interested, definitely check out that video. But I gave this one 5 stars as well. To me, this is one of the most perfect rom-coms out there right now. I think this is also Christina Lauren's best book from what I've heard from a lot of other people that have read their other books. I've only read 2 of their books so far. I read The Unhoneymooners, and I also read Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating this past month, and yeah, this was just so well done. It's an enemies to lovers romance about Olive and Ethan. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of this book, but if you haven't, basically they end up going on this non-refundable honeymoon because Olive's sister and Ethan's younger brother, who had just gotten married, they got sick and they couldn't go. And so over this 10-day trip to Hawaii, Ethan and Olive start falling in love, and yeah, this was just so well done. Highly recommend it. Next up, I have Marriage for One by Ella Mays. This is an adult romance that I read for Smuttathon. I actually listened to the audiobook off of Audible Escape, so if you have that service, definitely check out this book. I did give it 4 stars, but I really feel like this is a book that I'm I'm going to want to reread at some point. And knowing what I know now about the story, I think I'll enjoy it even more the second time. So this is essentially a marriage of convenience story about Jack and Rose. And this is a chunky book. It's like 500 pages. It's definitely a really, really slow burn romance, but I really did enjoy it. This is definitely more of a drama than a rom-com, because I do feel like the first half started out a bit more lighthearted and funny. One thing I really loved about this book was that in the first half, Rose would count the amount of times that Jack would smile, and most of the chapters would be 0 because Jack is also a very, very brooding hero. So again, if you're into that trope, definitely check out this book. The audiobook is definitely the way to go as well. It's just so well done. Next up, I have another book that I read for Smuttathon, and that is Vicious by LJ Shen. I adored this book so much. I gave it 5 stars when I read it. This is another enemies to lovers romance, but this one is a lot darker. We're following 2 characters, Baron, but he goes by Vicious, and Amelia, and their story spans like 10 years because it time jumps between when they were in high school and present day. And even though Vicious is quite the asshole for most of this book, LJ Shen just knows how to write a redemption arc for a character, and by the end you end up falling in love with Vicious just as much as Amelia does, and I highly recommend it. I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in this series. So next I have 3 books by the same author. The first one is From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zapata. I actually read this last week, so I will be talking about this in my February mid-month wrap-up, so be on the lookout for that. But I gave this 5 stars. I really loved it. Mariana Zapata is very well known for writing the slowest of slow burn romances, so they're all very chunky books. This was like a 500-page book, and I have to say it didn't really feel like I was reading a 500-page book. It was that well paced. So this is a figure skating romance. It's also an enemies to lovers story about Jasmine and Ivan. And Jasmine at the beginning of this story is definitely considering just quitting figure skating altogether. She's 26 at this point, and her pair's career especially has not been going well. Her partner ended up leaving her. Ivan also is in the need of a new partner. They end up partnering together, and so essentially they have been enemies since I think they were teenagers, because they have been training in the same skating facility pretty much all of their lives, and there's just a lot of good banter in this book. Yeah, I will go into this a lot more in my February mid-month wrap-up, like I said, but I do highly recommend this one. So then the other 2 books of Mariana Zapata's that I got were Colty and The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. These are 2 sport romances. This one is a soccer romance, this one is a football romance, and these are both books that a lot of people that I follow really love. I haven't really seen a lot of people give this less than 4 or 5 stars, so I'm really excited to get to them. Again, they are both very chunky, slow burn romances. And I have The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This is a book that a lot of people love as well, but my friend Jessie from Jessie's Shelf, I will link her channel up in the cards above. This was her absolute favorite book of 2019, so I knew that I had to check it out myself. And I can't remember much about the plot of this, so I'm gonna read a little bit from the blurb. It says, Calla Fletcher wasn't even 2 when her mother took her and fled Alaska, unable to handle the isolation of the extreme rural lifestyle, leaving behind Calla's father, Ren Fletcher, in the process. Calla never looked back, and at 26, a busy life in Toronto is all she knows. But when Calla learns that Ren's days may be numbered, she knows that it's time to make the long trip back to the remote frontier town of her birth to attempt to fix their estranged relationship. So from what I understand, this is a romance, but it's also so much more than that because Calla is dealing with her father's illness. So yeah, I am really looking forward to this. I know that there is also a sequel to this called Wild at Heart, and I think that's coming out in March. So if I do really enjoy this first book, I will definitely check out the sequel. The next 2 books were my book of the month picks for February. So the first book I have is Anna K by Jenna Lee. This is one of the books for February, and then the other book I got as an add-on, and this one is essentially an Anna Karenina retelling, and I've heard nothing but good things about this. Reading the synopsis definitely reminded me of Gossip Girl, so I'll just read a little bit of it for you guys. It says, meet Anna K. At 17, she is at the top of Manhattan and Greenwich society. Even if she prefers the company of her horses and dogs, she has the perfect, if perfectly boring, boyfriend, and she has always made her Korean American father proud. proud, even if he can be a bit controlling. As her friends struggle with the pitfalls of teenage life, Anna always seems to sail gracefully above it all. That is until the night she meets Alexia Count Vronsky. A notorious playboy, Alexia is everything Anna is not, and there's more to the synopsis, but I don't want to risk spoiling any of it for myself or you guys. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to reading this at some point. And then the other book that I got as an add-on is Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center. I've heard really, really great things about this. This is a romance, but it's also considered to be more women's fiction because I think the plot definitely centers on a lot more than just the romance. This one says, Cassie Hanwell was born to handle emergencies. As one of the only female firefighters in her Texas firehouse, she's seen her fair share of them, and she's a total pro at managing other people's tragedies. But when her estranged and ailing mother asks her to give up her whole life and move to Boston, Cassie suddenly has an emergency of her own. So yeah, that just sounds really good. This is also a pretty short book, so I think I'll be able to fly through this no problem, and I look forward to reading this really soon. Next up, I have Find Me Their Bones by Sarah Wolf. I actually purchased the first book in this fantasy series called Bring Me Their Hearts some months back. It's definitely in one of my other book hauls, but this was just a really good price on Amazon. I was going to wait to buy it until after I read the first book, but I just couldn't pass up this deal. The first book, I believe, centers around this girl named Zara, I believe, and she is a soldier of this evil witch. And this witch basically owns her because she has her heart. And so in order to get her heart back from this witch, she has to steal the heart of this prince. And I'm assuming that a romance ensues between those two characters. But yeah, I am definitely looking forward to reading the first book and then this second installment. I've heard really, really good things about this series. Next up, I have two books by Taylor Jenkins Reid that I just couldn't resist having in my own personal library. So the first one is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I actually read this back in 2018. It was one of my top favorite books of that year. Can't recommend this enough. I'm sure you all have heard of this book, but it's essentially an historical fiction novel about this woman named Evelyn Hugo, who was a very famous movie star, and she's kind of along the lines of like a Marilyn Monroe, and she decides to tell her whole life story to this pretty unknown reporter. And then the other book of hers that I got is Daisy Jones and the Six. This was a book that I read twice last year, and it was one of my top favorite books of 2019. So if you want to check out that video, I will link that up in the cards above. But this is also a historical fiction for those of you guys that may not know about this fictional band called Daisy Jones and the Six. And this book just basically chronicles how the band got together and how they eventually split up in the end. But yeah, I cannot recommend these two books highly enough, and I definitely plan on rereading them at some point because they are just that phenomenal. Next up, I have A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. This is book 2 in the Curse So Dark and Lonely series. I read the first book in this series last year and I adored it so much that it was also a part of my best book of 2019 video, and I'm so looking forward to reading the sequel, but at the same time I kind of want to hold off on it because I'm not exactly sure when the third book is coming out. So yeah, but I definitely look forward to reading this at some point. Okay guys, we only have 2 books left to talk about, and the first one I have is the 10th anniversary edition of Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Infernal Devices series, and this is a part of her Shadowhunter Chronicles universe. And this is definitely by far my absolute favorite series of this entire universe. So I just couldn't resist having a copy for myself. This is a beautiful edition. We've got some illustrations on the end pages right there, and I'm sure there's, you know, pictures and things throughout. I'm actually planning on rereading this series at some point this year because the first book in the Last Hours series, which is called Chain of Gold, that is actually a sequel series to this one. So I kind of want to reread this series so that I can start that series and know what is happening. And the very last book I have to talk about is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is the Waterstone exclusive edition, I believe, and it's so gorgeous. This definitely reminds me of Strange the Dreamer, not only in like the insect that's on the cover, but also the plot, because I think it's about this guy who works in a university library and he finds this mysterious book, which then sets him off on an adventure. I haven't actually read anything from Erin Morgenstern before. I do own The Night Circus, but I haven't read it yet, but I plan to at some point. And then I plan on jumping into this one. I've heard really great things about this book as well as The Night Circus, but I've also kind of heard mixed feelings about like her writing style. It doesn't seem to work for everyone. So I'm just looking forward to seeing if she is an author that works for me. Okay guys, that's it for this book haul. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you would consider pressing that like button and subscribing if you haven't yet. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!